Hi, my name's Dana. We're in the Hollyhock Garden, and we're going to talk today about putting your garden to bed. So we're just going to go over some of the basic little practices to make sure your garden is all safely asleep for the winter. Alright, so let's move over here and see some of the things that we're going to do. Hi, so this is an aster, and this attracts a lot of pollinating insects. Once the sun comes on this, it's going to really come alive with insects. So that's really nice. This is one of the last things we're going to chop down in the Hollyhock garden, simply just for that reason and because it's so beautiful. It's nice to have the extra bees and flies pollinating around here. So most everything is going to get chopped to the ground here in the garden. There's some exceptions, of course, of things that don't get chopped to the ground. We have overwintering vegetables like the kale over there, and things such as hydrangeas, rose bushes, and other large, woody shrubs will not be chopped down, and we'll prune them in the spring. But most everything else, as I said, gets chopped down. So here is some really nice Oriental Trumpet lilies, and we're waiting just a little bit longer to chop these down because they need all the energy from their leaves to go down into their bulb. So whereas most of the earlier lilies have already been chopped down, they've already turned completely yellow. This is a later lily, still a little green, and we want to give it as much time as possible. But very soon we'll be cutting this one down and just mulching it with straw, a nice thick layer of straw to keep about this thick, to keep the bulb warm if it gets quite cold. Now the dahlias, we do not generally dig out our dahlias and save them for the winter. We generally just chop them down and mulch them again with a thick layer of mulch. If you do need to dig out your dahlias because of your conditions in your garden or where you live, it's important when you lift your dahlia bulbs to clean them off very well and then dry them. Have them sit out in a warm, dry place for a while until they're not wet and not too dirty, and then put them in a box with dry peat moss. It's important to keep your dahlia bulbs dry in storage, and then keep them in just a cool, dark place. Would be fine, as long as it's not freezing. So once everything has been chopped down to the ground, then you want to mulch your garden. And mulching the garden not only is protecting your plants, but it's very important to keep the weeds down, especially here in our climate. Chickweed and grasses will continue to grow on any half-nice day in the winter and continue to seed. So mulching your garden is going to stop weeds from spreading and growing. Before mulching your garden, make sure that you thoroughly weed the soil, because all those weeds, like I say, will just continue seeding underneath the mulch. Well, you can use all sorts of different types of mulch. This is straw. I recommend straw as long as you know it's from a good source and it doesn't have a lot of seeds in it. That can be disastrous. Hay, for instance, is more of an animal feed and often has a lot of seeds of grass and other plants in it, and can be quite disastrous actually to put on your garden. But of course, if you don't have access to these things, there's leaves, there's seaweed. It's excellent. Just getting it is the problem. So we use oat straw or rye straw here in the Hollyhock garden. Alright, let's move down and take a little look at the Canna Lilies. So here we are by our Canna Lilies. There's Canna Lilies, there's Calla Lilies, and of course there's real lilies. The Canna Lily actually isn't a true lily, but these are very tender plants and they're really nice, and they won't generally survive the winter here in our climate. Once in a while they kind of come back, but they're not nearly as vigorous and come up much later. They're not very happy about it if they do. So we always dig up our cannas in the fall, and we put them in boxes with straw and peat moss. In this case, with the cannas, it's not essential that you spend so much time drying out the bulbs and cleaning them up like you do need to for the dahlias. In this case, the straw and the peat moss can even be a little bit moist. If your canna bulbs get too dried out and baked by heat and dryness, they can actually die. So a little bit of moisture is fine. Some of the dirt still on your bulbs is okay too. So just in general, I would chop this down right at the base here. I'm going to be doing this soon. But you can see that they're very easy, very fleshy, easy to cut. And so I'd be cutting these all. And then with a fork or a shovel, I would lift up the roots in here. And they're not too deep and they come up quite easily. So I'll be doing that later. So that's a nice one. You want to make sure that your Canna Lilies are put safely away for the winter. And then in the spring, you're always able to divide them and have even more and give them to your friends. Over here, we're going to be planting tulips. So that's sort of a fall activity when you're putting your garden to bed. And this is an example of a nicely weeded bed that's been all cleared out. We used to have butternut squash growing here. That's all been harvested and pulled out. And now here we have our tulips. So we save our own tulip bulbs. These are from the giant tulips that we grow. They're quite huge. And we save our own bulbs from them. And so we've sort of separated them into smaller bulbs and larger bulbs. The larger bulbs do better and make larger plants. So we'll just be planting tulips here, and you can dig a hole about 6 inches deep. Tulips can be quite deep, so make sure they're not floating on the surface. It's pretty hard to put them too deep. I mean, 6 inches is perfect. And give them some bone meal, and that's about all they really need, as long as your soil is decent. And cover them up, and always make sure you mark them with a stake, something indicating where your tulips are, so you remember. And that's pretty well it for the tulips. And, you know, make sure that you turn off or turn on all your taps, or turn off the water to your garden, and leave your taps open, drain the system, because your taps can freeze, and it can be quite a difficulty in the spring dealing with that. All right, thank you everybody, and goodbye.